Welcome to the inaugural episode of a brand new podcast, Stories from the Christian Heart. These are real-life stories of how people show their love for Jesus by putting their faith into action. These are also the inspiring stories of everyday people who've made a difference in the lives of others. The stories come from all over the United States and even from other countries. They are warm, compassionate, and true stories of people like you who've had their hearts touched and who've decided to act on that touch and make a difference in our world. For example, in our first story today, who would have thought that helping a young neighbor with yard work and other chores around the house could have possibly made such a difference in a young boy's life? But it did. Here's the story of Dean, a neighbor and a living example of a man with a Christian heart.
When my husband was deployed a few months ago, our son was very sad. He had never been away from his dad, and he really missed him. Of all things, they had a special bond of doing yard work together. A couple days after the deployment, our son said he was going over to our neighbor's house to see if Dean could come out and work in the yard with him. Dean is not a child. He has a wife and 3 kids, as well as a full-time job. But Dean set aside whatever he was doing and started raking the yard with our son. That night, our son came home with the biggest smile on his face. And the next day, our son knocked on Dean's door, and out he came to help our son blow the leaves out of the yard. Nearly every day for the past couple months, Dean has been working outside with our son, not just in our yard, but other neighbors' yards. Dean can sense our son's sorrow of his dad not being there, but Dean is helping take our son's mind off that for a short period every day, and doing something that my son and husband love to do. Dean is also teaching him to serve and be responsible. Together, they chopped up a tree that had blown down across the road during a storm. My husband and I have 3 kids, and I don't know how I could have handled this deployment if it wasn't for Dean's unselfishness. He's made this manageable, and the joy he has brought to our son is immeasurable. He says he does this because he loves to help others, especially people who really have a need, just like Jesus taught us. It only takes one person to set an example that might end up having a snowball effect on a lot of people. Dean is certainly that example around our neighborhood.
Next, we'll hear from a former firefighter as he outlines his pathway from fighting fires to full-time ministry through something as simple as a passion for woodworking. Turns out that was the most effective way he could reach the young men in his community who most needed a helping hand. And the result was, in a word, magical.
I never thought I'd quit my job as a firefighter and go into full-time ministry, teaching unemployed young men the art of woodworking. But I felt the Lord's calling, and you don't say no when you hear that voice. I planned on being a firefighter my entire career, but my life changed once I got saved by a friend at the station. I started reading my Bible every day. I got to Matthew 4:19, and I felt like the Lord was speaking to me directly. He was calling me to share the gospel with people. But what could I possibly do to fulfill this? I prayed, and what became abundantly clear was that I was passionate about several things: Jesus, working, people, and building things. I'd built a few pieces of furniture and sold them to fund a mission trip, so I wondered if woodworking may be the vehicle to help me reach out to people. On my off days, I started working with a couple of guys who were having a very rough time in life, teaching them the art of woodworking. We built a couple of pieces of furniture together, and they sold it right away at a consignment store. Maybe we were onto something. A few friends saw the positive effect this was having on these young men and wanted to help me reach other guys who may be unemployed or struggling. So we started Magic City Woodworks. And it grew over time, so much that I had to recently leave my job with the fire department to run the ministry. We take unemployed young men, some just out of prison, some college graduates, and make furniture that is sold in stores and online. We don't just teach woodworking, we teach young men the art of work. We teach them responsibility, to show up on time, to work with integrity. We teach them about managing their money. We all have a past, but we push their reset button when they first enter the shop. And we help them grow spiritually. We pray, have a daily devotion, and eat together. We are there to listen. So many millennials think work is miserable, something that we just have to do. But work is a gift from God. It's a form of worship. We may sound like a shop and think like a shop, but we also teach and minister. God has blessed this ministry beyond my wildest dreams. I'm excited to see where He takes this.
Our next story confronts the hopelessness of Alzheimer's, a disease that robs its victims of their most precious possessions, their minds. For those who've shepherded a loved one through the dark veils of the disease, Alzheimer's is one of the toughest battles to face for the victim and the victim's caregiver. But in the darkest hours, hope does shine through. And often it's because of something as simple as taking the time to talk.
My wife has Alzheimer's. So every afternoon I drive her through the country and we talk about the good old days. I'm trying to bring back any remnants of memories she has left. And while driving out to the country, we always pass the same homeless man on a downtown corner. So one day, I decided to stop and talk to him. And now it's become part of our routine. Each time we see Rick, I give him a little money, and he always gives me something in return. The items he gives me aren't as impactful as the stories he tells me, and especially the hope that he has for his future. Now, my wife doesn't remember a lot of what we talk about with him, but I do. And every conversation manages to impact me in a very powerful way. You see, Rick has a story, as everyone does. He desires love, like everyone does, and he deserves a second chance, just like everyone else. Thank goodness God gives us second chances, sometimes a number of them. I'm excited to see what Rick does with his second chance, and thankful he reminds me of the hope God gives all of us for the future.
Most of us remember the news following Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Stories of loss of life, of injuries, of devastation, and of dislocation of families in New Orleans and the Southeast by that historic Category 5 storm. Or you may recall similar stories from other hurricanes that impacted the lives of people and families all across the country. Our final story today tells of a woman and her Christian heart that was seeking a way to help mothers and the children who were impacted by these storms. Although she didn't have the financial resources to do something meaningful by herself, she did what she could and found a way to use technology to make a most powerful impact. Here's her story from the Christian heart.
I was still reeling from the loss of my baby when Hurricane Katrina stormed New Orleans. As I watched the coverage, my mind immediately went to the mothers. How are these mothers going to take care of their babies when their homes were flooded and they were being bused to auditoriums? I felt moved to go to Sam's and pick up some big boxes of diapers. Taking diapers seemed like a simple thing, but diapers were needed, and helping these mothers ministered to my hurting mama heart. So when my hometown of Baton Rouge experienced catastrophic flooding in August 2016, my mind went again to the mothers. Entire parishes were underwater and had to be gutted. Believing that we are called to be His hands and feet, I wanted to do what I could. I created an Amazon wish list for baby items such as diapers, wipes, and formula to be shipped to my home address. It took me less than 20 minutes to create the list and post it on social media. In the days that followed, we received box after box from Amazon from friends and strangers across the country who donated from the list. My kids also helped by sorting through the boxes. It was an easy way to show my kids they are called to be His hands and feet too. When Hurricane Harvey led to massive flooding in Houston, I felt led to do the same thing. I contacted a friend who is a school principal in Houston and asked if we could set up an Amazon wish list with the school's address and send out a link on social media. Again, in just a little time, I made a list full of baby items as well as supplies needed after a flood. In just a few days, we had friends and strangers donate over 2,000 items to people in need in Houston. The initial school we were helping received enough to begin passing supplies on to others in need. I have 6 kids and a full-time job. I don't have much money to give, but I can serve with my time and in prayer. It's fulfilling to know that even in the middle of the storm, you can still be used by God.
If you'd like to read more of our stories, you can find them on our website, thechristianheart.com, or on our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages.